Asia and William.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. This is my wife, Asia. I'm William from the Smileys. So we're the Smileys. So first off, it's an honor to be here.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
And our question stems around the actual. We kind of struggled with it because it was like we know this is a fictional tale, but it's also our reality. And us as African Americans, and we also have children.
Yes.
So
a son and a daughter.
And a son and a daughter. So the part where you say comply, like just put the phone down, just do what they say. Was that to say like if we comply, we go home, even though we already know that's not necessarily the fact? And is that a luxury you feel like is only afforded to law enforcement officers? Because even when we do comply, as we've seen time and time again, we still meet our ultimate demise.
And it's like within the movie, it's like you get that background with the police officer saying it and then the child saying it. Everyone got to say it, but who does it really apply to?
That's the point. That's the double standard that we're living with, that we're seeing every single day of our lives, specifically in the past week in this country. There is no answer. And that's the point. I made this film because I adopted my nephew when he was going into the 8th grade, and he came to live with us in a very nice part of town, in a nice neighborhood. And during that time, we start seeing, the Michael Brown situation happen. And he came to me and said, Uncle Nate, what do I do if I'm stopped by the police? And we had this talk. And I realized just how not only disempowered I was, but how I was traumatizing him by telling him to really forfeit his rights, to put his hands up, to get off his bike slowly, to keep eye contact so he's not seen as a threat, to smile. And I just realized that we are in a situation where there is no answer. Our lives are in the hands of people who are bought into a systemically racist infrastructure that clouds every moment of their judgment at our expense. I'd love to have maybe Omari speak to this as also a father of sons, to get his outlook on it as well. What's up, brother?
How you doing, my brother? You look strong.
Well, I'm ready. Father sits on the throne, brother.
So speaking of the throne, for you, young king and queen, who've been blessed to have 2 kids, Nate and I have talked about this often, and what we also know is from a very spiritual standpoint, children are but loan to us, And that's what really, really sucks, is coming to that very mundane human reality. When you become a parent, you might fight that notion and you claim ownership and you parent them with that notion of ownership, which is very necessary to be able to protect them. But equally, it almost seemed like what Nate was saying, not in a cryptic way, but in a very, very poetic way, is I do not only due diligence to you and your life, but also to my legacy, if I give you whatever need be given so that you breathe another day. How many times as Black men, and particularly specifically Black men, not to single us out versus Black women, but we often are asked at some point by some white counterpart, colleague or classmate or teammate, what is the deal with you guys nodding at each other when you walk by? We've all heard it, Black women included. And it's almost a moment of excitement for us to answer the question of the legacy or lineage of grandpops who are in the oligarch of those who are about Donald Trump's age and his skin color, have often not asked that question. So for us to be asked that question by, dare I say, their lineage, grandparents again, or grandkids again, great grandkids, to say, hey, Nate, Omari, Shane, when he becomes a father, what is that thing that you guys have and you've had it since you're 12 years old and you walk by another brother and you kind of, what up? Well, we know what the answer is. The answer truly, and this speaks definitely to Nate and his uncling, but becoming a father. He was an avuncular figure for his nephew, and then all of a sudden he was a fatherly figure for his nephew. It speaks to this reality. And what we're doing when we would up is we're basically saying, I acknowledge that you're still on this earth. Whether you're 11, whether you're 10 years senior that and 21, whether you're 10 years senior that and 31, 41, on to 51, you are still a breathing, living tangible entity called young man, growing into your kingship and your ownership of your space and plot on this big old earth. And we acknowledge that. And so I think what Nate was getting at, it was very, again, it was stated poetically. He could not explain necessarily to his son, the character played by his son. He could not, or the son character that he fathers in the movie, he could not explain it to the friend of the son character. But what he could say is, what I know is that if you wake up tomorrow and I offer you the same breakfast that I offered you the day before, then we're that much further into the lineage and the legacy of us remaining on earth to be able to what up each other, you and your friend included, when y'all go off to school. And of course, Nate's character, works at the same school that the kid is at. Then if you don't get to come home and the remaining breakfast never happens again because you're no longer breathing, you're not a tangible entity on this earth. And so, yeah, you can feel a way as a father. Nate for his children, plural, Omari for his children, plural, you too as well. You can feel a way, particularly when you're talking to your young Black sons about, hey, tuck your tail a bit. It could feel like you're saying tuck your tail a bit. But in reality, if your heartbeat is still rocking the next day, the next week, the next month, 20 years from that point, then I don't think there's any shame in that. Dr. King said it best. Longevity has its place, but he could have stated life has its place. He couldn't have even stated that longevity has its place if he didn't have a heartbeat, to house the body that then, of course, manufactured the mouth to be able to say that. So it's incumbent upon us to try to convince our children, particularly our young Black and brown males, that it's okay sometimes to be compliant so that you can go off and finish the dreams that that we as your father or we as your mother or grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, what have you, older siblings, we've all sat and prayed for your existence to turn into something great. And if you don't come home in the flesh, then that doesn't really happen. So I think it was a beautiful moment in the movie, and it made Nate's character super vulnerable. And I think that's a button that within his character, all of us get to push as viewer, not only us as castmates, but as viewer, you get to go, okay, now you're rooting for him. You're rooting for him because he didn't audaciously in an arrogant way assume that his son would outwit a white cop who might have an intention to do whatever he needs to do when he knew that it was a cell phone and not a gun. So I thought it was actually one of the best parts of the movie, honestly. So it's kind of cool that you guys asked about it.
And I'll toss, I want to, toss now to Milana as well, if you want to speak to it. I think I will say this, just on the tail of Omari. I think I do think there's trauma in that, in the reality that we have to have a conversation with our children on how they might conduct themselves in the hand of someone that we pay their salaries, that it's their design, their job is to protect and serve us. But we are telling our children to treat them who is untrained, most oftentimes uneducated, most oftentimes biased, most oftentimes racist, whatever color, just by association of their group. And so I think there's trauma in that. Milana, do you want to speak to it
regarding compliance?
Yeah, just the question around when we're how we're asked to comply and kind of separate ourselves from our freedoms and our humanity to kind of fit in the box of safety for these law enforcement officers. And I'm just paraphrasing your question.
Absolutely. I feel like it's a challenge because you're talking about during heightened states of emotion, right? When we're confronted with any law official or anyone of power who has the potential to take our lives or protect our lives, and we're told to comply, it's typically during a state of confrontation. And so just as a human being, you feel inclined to stand up and defend yourself. It's just the natural state of being. In my opinion, I feel like the compliance element is governing thyself. We still have to protect ourselves. We still have to cover ourselves. We still have to recognize that it is a system that is set up with the intentions of protecting property as opposed to lives. Mm-hmm. And so it's about what the compliance means, right? So if you look at, I'm from Chicago, born and raised. We have a case right now with Lori Lightfoot, who is the mayor, and Anjanou Young, who is a social worker. And this woman was a law-abiding citizen in the privacy of her own home. and we're still told to comply in our houses. And so it does beg to raise a level of awareness as to what exactly are we supposed to do? How do we function in this world? And specifically in this country, how do we function with a system that is telling us to behave and we're doing so, and yet and still we're still being executed?
Yeah, and they're not complying. I mean, I know that opens up a can of worms, but the double standard is blaring.
That's the truth.
I mean, it doesn't even, it's ironic, Nate, because typically you could say, if we're doing this junket at any other time in space, even within the time of space of Black Lives Mattering, which obviously we know that has been pervasive over the years. It's ironic, Nate, because it's live and in color every night on whether it's conservative Fox or whether it's CNN. Presently, what we've known for the last 96 hours is just your statement made to proof. That is not only showing that there's no compliance of necessity, but to Nate's point, you even have law officers, you have officials who are opening gates for the compliance or the lack thereof to waltz right in and do what they feel need be done. Because I think Milana makes a great point. The caste system with an E at the end of it. And that's really like the great book written by this sister who wrote it. That's what this country is set up for. I think that I'm not, misquoting and saying that even the likes of Adolf Hitler in the era of 1930 to 1940 or what have you, got a lot of what he was able to do and impose on Jews because of what was happening to brown people here in America. And it is that of a caste system, again, to the point that Milana made, where protection is more about prioritizing property and not human life, even though at times we were thought of as property and not of human life. So there's the irony and juxtaposition in that. But yeah, compliance is an interesting thing. And just the fact that Nate was able to have a conversation about all of it in one fell swoop called movie is pretty amazing. And to give a voice, again, we'll state this a lot during this next 2 hours, but to give a voice to those officials. He just did something that a director hasn't done prior. He gave a voice to the officials so that they can state or answer your question, for example. They can answer that, whether they truthfully answer it or not. So there's that.
All
All
right.
right, we have about 15 minutes left.